In 1976, a series of sensationalist headlines changed Australian car culture forever. A handful of incidents involving modified cars were amplified by the media into a menace to society, creating the infamous hoon stereotype that would haunt multiple generations. What started as a false accusation against a small group of enthusiasts spiraled into decades of restrictive legislation. The ripple effects, draconian vehicle laws that still exist today, a demonised youth car scene, and the death of an authentic Aussie cultural movement, all based on exaggerations that were never true. The golden era before the fall. What if I told you Australia once had one of the most vibrant teen car cultures in the world? Before the infamous hoon stereotype took hold, the early to mid-1970s represented a golden age for young Aussie car enthusiasts. A time when the connection between teenagers and their vehicles wasn't seen as dangerous, but celebrated. The streets of Australia during this period roared with the sound of powerful V8 engines. Young drivers, many barely old enough to vote, expressed themselves through iconic street machines that became extensions of their identity. This youth culture flourished across suburban Australia, embraced by teenagers nationwide. The stars of this scene were homegrown heroes with names that still stir emotion in automotive circles. The Charger, Monaro, GT Falcon, and Torana. These vehicles represented something uniquely Australian. With petrol prices relatively low and horsepower reigning supreme, young drivers modified their vehicles to stand out, creating distinctive machines that reflected their personalities. Friday and Saturday nights transformed ordinary streets into impromptu car shows. The ritual was simple: cruise down the main drag, stop at the local servo, and spend hours talking engines and modifications. These gatherings were social events where friendships formed around shared passion, like a mechanical orchestra, where each custom vehicle played its distinctive note in harmony. Modifications followed a distinctly Australian style. Holdens received characteristic purple flake paint jobs that sparkled like amethyst under streetlights. Falcons got wild rear spoilers and hood scoops that hinted at the power beneath. Toranas were stripped down and rebuilt for maximum power-to-weight ratio. Parts were often fabricated by hand in suburban garages using basic tools and remarkable creativity. This car culture was deeply intertwined with Australian identity. The Holden Monaro and Ford Falcon GT symbolised Australian manufacturing prowess and national pride. These were cars built by Australians. For Australians, young enthusiasts felt connected to something bigger than themselves. In an era before the internet, car meets provided crucial social connections. The scene crossed socio-economic boundaries, creating unlikely friendships. The kid who couldn't afford a V8 could still earn respect by helping others tune their engines. Even in these golden days, warning signs appeared. The supercar scare of 1972 foreshadowed trouble ahead. New South Wales Transport Minister Milton Morris labelled high-performance vehicles as bullets on wheels, revealing the government's growing unease. The Ford Falcon GT HO Phase 4 became an early casualty, cancelled before production. What made this era special was the authentic community built around genuine passion. Young enthusiasts expressed themselves through mechanical creativity and shared experiences. The car scene provided positive outlets for teenage energy, teaching valuable skills from mechanics to social interaction. But beneath this vibrant scene, a storm was gathering. The authentic Aussie car culture was about to face an unexpected threat that would transform public perception almost overnight, changing Australian car culture forever. The spark that lit the fire. July 12, 1976. A day so ordinary it could have been any Monday, yet it flipped the switch on a nationwide frenzy. Most Australians remember it as just another winter day, but for the nation's car enthusiasts, it marked the beginning of the end. What happened was unremarkable. A minor incident involving modified cars on Sydney's outskirts. No serious injuries, no major property damage. The kind of incident that typically wouldn't make it past the police blotter. But something was different this time. A local news outlet transformed this isolated event into something sinister. The headline that ran the next morning created a narrative about dangerous youth and their deadly machines terrorizing Australian streets. Where police reports noted a minor traffic incident, the newspaper painted a picture of organised street racing and reckless endangerment. The timing was perfect for a moral panic. Australia was experiencing social changes that made many uncomfortable. Youth unemployment was rising, and the older generation worried about teens with too much time and not enough direction. Modified cars became easy visual targets, loud symbols of youth rebellion. The news outlet benefited immediately from increased readership. Their sensationalist angle proved profitable, and within days, other publications followed. The story spread across the country, with each outlet adding embellishments, making the threat seem more widespread than reality. A single incident morphed into a narrative about a national crisis. Media outlets misquoted police reports and distorted statistics. One newspaper claimed modified cars were responsible for over 50% of traffic fatalities involving young drivers, a completely fabricated statistic designed to stoke fear. Another reported on street racing gangs in major cities, despite police having no evidence such groups existed. Politicians spotted an opportunity. Being tough on hoons, a term barely used before this media frenzy, became an easy win with voters concerned about safety. Local councillors promised to take back the streets from dangerous drivers. Police departments received pressure to address this supposedly growing menace. Officers who previously maintained good relationships with car enthusiasts suddenly found themselves targeting modified vehicles. The focus shifted from dangerous driving behaviours to the cars themselves. The public perception shift happened with astonishing speed. Within weeks, Australians believed packs of reckless teens in souped-up cars were terrorising neighbourhoods. The reality, that most enthusiasts spent more time working on their vehicles than driving them, and serious accidents typically involved older drivers or alcohol, was lost in the hysteria. This moral panic effectively erased the distinction between enthusiasm and recklessness. A teen carefully restoring a Monaro was viewed the same as someone doing burnouts outside a school. The modified car itself became evidence of criminal intent. The accusations spread through Australian society, but what happened next would transform temporary outrage into permanent damage. The hastily crafted narrative was about to become enshrined in law, with consequences that would echo through generations of Australian car culture. From moral panic to legal crackdown. Within weeks of the media frenzy, politicians across Australia were scrambling to be the first to propose new laws targeting hoons, a term that barely existed in the Australian vocabulary before this moral panic began. What started as sensationalist headlines quickly transformed into real, tangible consequences for young drivers nationwide. State parliaments fast-tracked new legislation. The disconnect between actual driving behaviours and public perception grew wider by the day. Lawmakers weren't solving a real crisis. They were responding to a largely manufactured problem that had taken on a life of its own. Young car enthusiasts suddenly found themselves criminalised for modifications that had been perfectly legal just months earlier. The new restrictive legislation covered everything from exhaust noise to suspension height to engine modifications. Parts that had been sold openly in auto shops for years were suddenly prohibited. The focus wasn't on how cars were driven, but on the cars themselves. A responsibly driven modified Monaro was now considered more dangerous than a standard family sedan driven recklessly. One of the most significant consequences hit young drivers financially. Insurance premiums for V8-powered vehicles skyrocketed overnight, especially for drivers under 25. Some companies refused coverage entirely. This effectively priced many young enthusiasts out of the hobby altogether. Some dealerships, pressured by the changing climate, began restricting high-performance car sales to younger buyers. Police departments across Australia formed specialised anti-hoon units with expanded powers that would have been unthinkable before the panic. In Victoria, these units could seize and impound vehicles for 30 days if they merely believed a driver had committed a hoon-related offence, regardless of who owned the car or whether charges were even filed. Courts gained the power to permanently confiscate vehicles after 3 offences within 3 years, with police authorised to sell or crush the seized cars. The penalties extended far beyond vehicle seizure. Courts imposed fines up to 240 penalty units, exceeding $28,000 in some cases, and/or imprisonment for up to 2 years. Drivers also faced demerit points and license suspensions for underlying offences. A simple exhaust modification could now potentially cost a young enthusiast their car, licence and financial stability. Car enthusiasts tried fighting back. They organised rallies, wrote to newspapers and formed advocacy groups to counter the narrative. But their efforts were systematically ignored or misrepresented in media coverage. News outlets preferred to continue portraying teen hoons as public enemies rather than presenting the reasonable arguments from car clubs about unfair targeting. Several influential politicians built their personal brands around being tough on hoons. Their motivations went beyond public safety concerns. These laws provided easy political wins, with older voters concerned about youth culture more generally. The car modification scene became a convenient scapegoat for broader anxieties about young people. What's particularly telling is the evidence that emerged years later. Police data eventually revealed that most dangerous driving incidents actually involved older drivers or alcohol-related accidents unrelated to racing or car modifications. The statistical basis for targeting modified cars specifically had never existed. Studies commissioned well after the laws were implemented showed no correlation between vehicle modifications and accident rates among young drivers. By the time this evidence emerged, the damage was done. The laws were firmly established, a generation of car enthusiasts had been criminalised, and Australia's vibrant car modification culture had been fundamentally altered. The accusations against teen drivers that sparked the whole panic were ultimately proven false, but there was no rolling back the legislative changes or repairing the cultural damage. The anti-hoon legislation passed in every Australian state, enshrining unfounded stereotypes into law. Many of these laws remain on the books today, still affecting young car enthusiasts nearly 5 decades later. But the true cost of this moral panic wasn't just measured in fines or seized vehicles. It was the destruction of an authentic Australian cultural movement and the criminalisation of an entire generation's passion. And this legacy would echo through Australian car culture for decades to come. Almost 50 years later, the effects of this moral panic continue to shape Australian car culture. Modern P-plate laws, defect notices, and modification restrictions all trace back to this manufactured crisis. Young enthusiasts today face a regulatory landscape built on falsehoods that criminalised their predecessors for crimes that never existed at the scale portrayed. The parallels to today's world of viral misinformation are striking. A single incident, amplified by media-seeking engagement, created legislative changes that outlived the panic itself. This story isn't just about cars. It's about how easily public perception can be manipulated and how difficult it is to undo the damage once laws are passed. If you enjoyed this automotive history, subscribe for more stories that shaped car culture worldwide.